I never thought I would be standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning arguing with a building inspector about whether my house was falling apart, but there I was, coffee in hand, watching my neighbor Patricia Mooreland practically vibrating with satisfaction across the street. "Mr. Whitmore, I understand this is inconvenient, but we have to take all reports seriously," the inspector said, adjusting his clipboard. His name tag read Marcus Chen, and he looked like he would rather be anywhere else. "The complaint states that your property has significant structural damage, code violations, and poses a safety hazard to the neighborhood." I stared at him. "Are you kidding me right now? My house is fine. I literally just had the whole place inspected 6 months ago when I refinanced." Patricia was standing in her perfectly manicured lawn, arms crossed, wearing what I'd come to think of as her HOA president uniform, a crisp white polo shirt with the Willowbrook Estates logo embroidered on it, khaki capris, and sensible walking shoes. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and even from 50 feet away, I could see the smug expression on her face. Marcus sighed. "Look, I still need to do a walkthrough. If everything is up to code, you will be fine." But the report was pretty detailed. It mentioned foundation cracks, electrical hazards, plumbing issues, and structural instability. "That's insane," I said, feeling my blood pressure rising. "This is a 3-year-old house in Phoenix, Arizona. Everything was built to the latest standards. Patricia just has it out for me." "Why would she have it out for you?" I laughed bitterly. "Because I painted my mailbox black instead of the approved beige. Because my grass was half an inch too long 2 weeks ago. Because I parked my truck in my driveway instead of my garage one night. Take your pick." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I really cannot get involved in HOA disputes. I just need to inspect the property." "Fine," I said, unlocking my front door. "Let us get this over with." I led Marcus through my house, watching him examine walls, test outlets, check faucets, and peer into every corner. The whole process took about an hour. My house was a standard 2-story suburban build, nothing fancy but well-maintained. I'd bought it 3 years ago when I moved to Phoenix for my job as a software engineer. The neighborhood, Willowbrook Estates, had seemed nice at first. Good schools nearby, clean streets, friendly neighbors. Then, Patricia Mooreland had gotten elected HOA president 2 years ago, and everything went downhill. Marcus finished his inspection in the garage, testing the garage door mechanism and checking the water heater. He made notes on his clipboard, took several photos, and finally turned to me. "Mr. Whitmore, I cannot find any violations. Your house is in excellent condition, better than most properties I inspect, honestly." Relief flooded through me. "So we are done here?" "Well, I have to file my report, but yes, there's nothing wrong with your property." He paused. "Off the record, you might want to consider filing a false report complaint. Whoever called this in wasted city resources." "Oh, I know exactly who called it in," I said, glancing out the window toward Patricia's house. After Marcus left, I stood in my driveway, trying to decide my next move. Patricia had already gone inside, probably to avoid confronting me directly. That was her style. She would file complaints, send certified letters, and report violations, but she rarely spoke to me face to face. My phone buzzed. It was my buddy Derek from 2 streets over. "Dude, did I just see a building inspector at your place?" "Yeah," I replied. "Patricia reported my house is condemned." "Are you serious? That woman is unbelievable." Derek had his own Patricia stories. She had once measured his Halloween decorations and cited him for having an inflatable ghost that exceeded the maximum height restriction by 8 inches. The restriction was not even in the official HOA bylaws. She had just decided it was a rule. "I am done playing nice," I said. "I am going to the next HOA meeting and calling her out." "Good luck with that, man. She controls that board like a dictator." He was not wrong. The HOA board consisted of 5 people, and Patricia had somehow managed to stack it with her friends. There was Brenda, who ran the neighborhood book club that no one actually wanted to join. Gerald, a retired accountant who seemed to live for finding discrepancies in people's dues payments. Susan, Patricia's actual sister, which seemed like a conflict of interest but apparently was not against the rules. And then there was Tom, who I think just voted however Patricia told him to because he seemed perpetually confused about what was happening. The next board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at the community center. I marked it on my calendar and spent the next week gathering documentation. I printed out the inspector's report that cleared my house. I compiled every ridiculous violation notice Patricia had sent me over the past 2 years. I even pulled up the HOA governing documents and highlighted the sections about frivolous complaints and abuse of authority. Thursday evening arrived, and I walked into the community center ready for battle. About 30 other homeowners were scattered throughout the room, most looking bored or resigned. These meetings were usually tedious affairs where Patricia droned on about mailbox colors and proper lawn care techniques. Patricia sat at the head table with her board members, shuffling papers and whispering to Susan. She glanced up as I walked in, and I saw a flicker of something cross her face. Annoyance, maybe, or concern that I was there. The meeting started with the usual procedural stuff. Minutes from the last meeting, treasurer's report, upcoming neighborhood events. I sat through 45 minutes of mind-numbing details before we finally reached the open forum section where homeowners could raise concerns. I stood up. "I would like to address the board about a serious matter." Patricia looked at me with barely concealed irritation. "Please state your name and address for the record." "Ethan Whitmore, 847 Sagebrush Lane." I held up my folder of documents. "Last week, someone from this neighborhood filed a false report with the city claiming my house was structurally unsound and should be condemned. A building inspector came out, performed a full inspection, and found absolutely no violations. 0. My house is in perfect condition." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few people sat up straighter, suddenly interested. Patricia's expression did not change. "I am not sure why you are bringing this to the HOA board. That sounds like a city matter." "It is an HOA matter because the person who filed the false report was you, Patricia." The room went silent. Patricia's face flushed red. "That is a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" "The inspector told me the complaint came from the HOA president. That would be you. The complaint also referenced several HOA violations that you have been harassing me about for months, even though none of them are actual violations according to our governing documents." I pulled out the stack of notices she had sent me. "Mailbox color, grass height, vehicle parking. You have been on a campaign to make my life miserable. And when I did not cave to your petty demands, you escalated to trying to get my house condemned. That is abuse of authority, harassment, and filing a false government report, which is actually a crime in Arizona." Patricia stood up, her voice sharp. "I filed that report because I had genuine concerns about the structural integrity of your property. I saw cracks in your foundation and heard concerning noises." "You saw cracks?" I said. "When exactly did you see these cracks? Because that would require you to be on my property without permission, which is trespassing." "I could see them from the street. The inspector found no cracks, none. So either you are lying about what you saw or you filed a false report. Either way, you wasted city resources and tried to damage my property value with fraudulent claims." Brenda leaned over to whisper something to Patricia, but I was not done. "I also want to know why the board allows the president to file complaints without any oversight. The governing documents clearly state that violation notices should be approved by a majority of the board, but Patricia has been unilaterally issuing them left and right. That is not how this is supposed to work." Gerald, the accountant, frowned and started flipping through his own papers. He might have a point about the approval process. Patricia shot him a look that could have melted steel. "We can discuss procedural matters later. Right now, this homeowner is disrupting the meeting with unfounded accusations." "They are not unfounded," I said. "I have the inspector's report right here. I have copies for anyone who wants to see it." Several hands went up. I started passing around copies, and people began reading them immediately. The mood in the room had shifted. Patricia was losing control, and she knew it. "This meeting is getting off track," she said loudly. "We need to move on to other business." "I am not finished," I said. "I want the board to investigate Patricia's conduct and determine whether she is fit to serve as president. I also want a formal apology and assurance that this kind of harassment will not continue." "You will get no such thing," Patricia snapped. "Your property has been a problem since you moved in. You constantly push back against reasonable rules. You seem to think you are special and do not have to follow the same guidelines as everyone else." "What guidelines?" I said, feeling my frustration boil over. "The made-up ones you invent? Because I have read the actual HOA documents. Patricia. There's no rule about mailbox colors being beige only. There's no rule about not parking in your own driveway. There's no maximum height for Halloween decorations. You're making things up and pretending they are official rules. A woman I recognized from the neighborhood stood up. He is right. Patricia sent me a violation notice about my garden gnome being visible from the street. I checked the covenants. There's nothing about garden gnomes. Or wind chimes, another man added. She made me take down my wind chimes and said they were a noise violation. But my neighbor 3 houses down has wind chimes, and she has never said anything to him. More people started speaking up, sharing their own stories of Patricia's overreach. The meeting devolved into chaos, with homeowners arguing and Patricia banging a gavel trying to restore order. "Enough!" she shouted. "This meeting is adjourned." "You cannot just adjourn when things get difficult," Gerald said, surprising everyone. "We need to address these concerns." Patricia glared at him. "Fine. We will table this discussion until next month's meeting. The board will review the complaints and make a determination." I shook my head. "That's not good enough. I want action now." "Well, you will have to wait," Patricia said coldly. "That is how parliamentary procedure works." She gathered her things and walked out, with Susan hurrying after her. Brenda and Tom followed, looking uncomfortable. Gerald stayed behind, still reading through the documents. "For what it is worth," he said to me quietly, "I think you have a legitimate complaint. Patricia has been very aggressive lately. Some of us have been concerned." "Some of you?" I said. "You are on the board. You could do something about it." He sighed. "It is complicated. She has a lot of support, and honestly, most people do not want to deal with the drama of a board fight." "Well, the drama is here whether you want it or not," I said. I left the meeting frustrated, but also oddly energized. At least other people were starting to see what I had been dealing with. I was not alone in this anymore. Over the next few days, several neighbors reached out to me. Some shared their own Patricia horror stories. Others offered support if I wanted to push for her removal from the board. A few even suggested we organize a recall election, which according to the bylaws required a petition signed by 30% of homeowners. I spent that weekend drafting a petition. It outlined Patricia's abuses of authority, the false report she filed about my house, and the need for new leadership. By Wednesday, I had signatures from 42% of the neighborhood. People were more fed up than I had realized. I submitted the petition to the board on Thursday morning, hand-delivering copies to each board member's house. Gerald answered his door and actually smiled when he saw what I was holding. "Good for you," he said. "This has been a long time coming." Patricia did not answer her door, but I left the envelope in her mailbox along with a note explaining that, per the bylaws, she had 30 days to respond and a recall election would be scheduled. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Marcus Chen, the building inspector who came to your property last week." "Oh, hi. Is there a problem?" "No, not with your property, but I wanted to give you a heads up about something. After I filed my report on your house, I got a call from Patricia Mooreland requesting that I come inspect her property." I blinked. She requested an inspection? Yes, she said she wanted to make sure her house met all current safety standards. I went out there yesterday. He paused. "Mr. Whitmore, I found significant violations." "Wait, what? I probably should not be telling you this, but given that she filed a false report about your property, I thought you should know. Her house has serious electrical issues, unpermitted additions, and plumbing problems. I had to issue a violation notice. She has 30 days to remedy the issues or face potential fines and legal action." I sat down heavily on my couch. "You are kidding." "I am not. The electrical panel in her garage is a fire hazard. She has an addition on the back of her house that was never properly permitted or inspected. And there is evidence of long-term water damage in one of the bathrooms that has compromised the subfloor. It is pretty bad." "She called you to inspect her own house and you found all that?" "Yeah. I think she was trying to demonstrate something, maybe that she was being proactive about safety in the neighborhood, but it backfired spectacularly." After Marcus hung up, I sat there for a long moment, processing this information. Patricia had tried to get my house condemned and ended up exposing major violations in her own property. The irony was almost too perfect. I did not have to wait long for the news to spread. By the next morning, several neighbors had heard about Patricia's violations through the HOA grapevine. The neighborhood Facebook group, which Patricia normally controlled with an iron fist, was suddenly full of posts discussing the situation. Patricia went radio silent. She did not respond to emails, did not answer her door, and stopped posting in the Facebook group. Susan made a post defending her sister, claiming the violations were minor and being blown out of proportion, but no one was buying it. The recall election was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Gerald called an emergency board meeting to discuss temporary leadership arrangements. Patricia did not show up to that meeting either. The remaining board members voted to suspend her authority pending the recall election, with Gerald serving as interim president. It was the most productive board meeting I had ever attended. Within an hour, we had cleared up half a dozen made-up rules Patricia had been enforcing, established a proper violation notice approval process, and set up a homeowner complaint system for dealing with board member overreach. 2 weeks before the recall election, I got another surprise. A police car pulled up to Patricia's house around 10 in the morning. 2 officers went inside and emerged 30 minutes later with Patricia in handcuffs. I watched from my front window, stunned. Several other neighbors had come out to see what was happening. Patricia was put in the back of the police car, her face red and tear-streaked. Susan came running out of the house, shouting something at the officers. I found out later that day what had happened. Apparently, Patricia had been embezzling HOA funds. Gerald had started reviewing the financial records more carefully after Patricia's suspension, and he found discrepancies going back 18 months. About $40,000 was missing, funneled through fake vendor invoices and padded expense reports. When confronted with the evidence, Patricia had apparently confessed. The board had no choice but to report it to the police. Embezzlement of that amount was a felony in Arizona. The recall election became unnecessary. Patricia resigned from the board immediately after being charged. Susan also resigned, either out of loyalty to her sister or because she was implicated in the financial irregularities. It was not clear. The neighborhood held a special election to fill the empty board seats. I did not run, having had enough drama for one lifetime, but several reasonable people stepped up. A retired teacher named Margaret won the presidency. She immediately set about reforming how the HOA operated, focusing on transparency and community building rather than enforcement and control. Patricia's legal troubles mounted over the following months. In addition to the embezzlement charges, she was charged with filing a false government report for the complaint about my house. The city took those charges seriously, especially after the inspector testified about the details. I had to testify at one of the preliminary hearings. It was surreal sitting in a courtroom describing how Patricia had harassed me over mailbox colors and grass height. The prosecutor used it to establish a pattern of behavior showing Patricia's abuse of authority and willingness to misuse official systems for personal vendettas. Patricia eventually took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to embezzlement and filing a false report in exchange for a reduced sentence. She got 2 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 1 year, 5 years of probation, and was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA plus fines. Her house was sold to cover the restitution payments and legal fees. The new owners, a young couple with a baby, were friendly and normal. They painted their mailbox a cheerful blue, and no one said a word about it. The whole ordeal had taken about 6 months from start to finish, 6 months of stress, anger, documentation, and confrontation. But in the end, justice was served, and the neighborhood was better for it. I learned a lot through the experience. I learned that standing up to bullies is worth it, even when it is exhausting. I learned that other people are often dealing with the same problems, and sometimes all it takes is one person to speak up for everyone to find their voice. I learned that HOA governing documents are actually important and that you should read them carefully. Most importantly, I learned that karma is real, and sometimes it works faster than you expect. About a year after everything settled down, I was working in my front yard when Margaret walked by with her dog. She stopped to chat and we talked about the upcoming neighborhood barbecue she was organizing. "You know," she said, "I have been thinking about what happened with Patricia. It is amazing how one person with unchecked authority can cause so much damage. Yeah, I agreed. But it is also amazing how quickly things can turn around with the right leadership. We have you to thank for that. If you had not stood up to her, we might still be dealing with her nonsense. I shrugged. I was just defending my property. I did not set out to take down the HOA president. But you did, and the neighborhood is better for it. She smiled. Sometimes the right person ends up in the right place at the right time. After she left, I stood in my driveway looking at my house. My perfectly maintained code-compliant house with its black mailbox and occasionally too long grass. It felt good to live somewhere I did not have to constantly look over my shoulder or document every little thing to protect myself from bogus complaints. The experience had changed me, though. I was more aware now of how power structures worked, even in small settings like HOA boards. I paid attention to board elections and read the meeting minutes. I spoke up when I saw problems. I encouraged other homeowners to do the same. Derek invited me over for a beer one evening, and we sat on his back patio watching the sunset. "Remember when Patricia cited me for that Halloween ghost?" he said, laughing. "How could I forget? That was ridiculous. You know what I did this year? I put up a 12-foot skeleton. Margaret loved it. She even posted a picture on the Facebook group." "Different world now," I said, "thanks to you." "Thanks to all of us," I corrected. "It took a lot of people finally saying enough is enough." We clinked our beer bottles together, and I felt a sense of contentment I had not experienced in a long time. My neighborhood felt like a community again, not a dictatorship. The legal proceedings against Patricia wrapped up completely about 18 months after the initial incident with the building inspector. She served her time, paid her restitution, and moved out of state after her release. I never saw her again, and that was fine with me. Susan sent me an apology letter about a year after everything went down. She claimed she had not known about the embezzlement and felt terrible about how Patricia had treated people. She admitted that family loyalty had blinded her to her sister's faults. I appreciated the apology, even if it came late. The HOA's finances were fully audited and cleaned up, the missing money was repaid, and new safeguards were put in place to prevent future embezzlement. Gerald stayed on as treasurer and took his oversight role much more seriously. One of the most satisfying moments came about 2 years after the initial incident. The neighborhood threw a block party, something Patricia had always opposed because she thought it would be too noisy and disruptive. Margaret organized it with help from several other homeowners, and it was a huge success. There were bounce houses for the kids, a potluck dinner, live music from a local band, and games and activities for all ages. People who had lived 3 houses away from each other for years were finally meeting and talking. The sense of community was palpable. I brought my famous barbecue ribs, which were a hit. I spent the evening talking with neighbors, playing cornhole, and enjoying the warm Phoenix evening. At one point, I found myself in a conversation with the couple who had bought Patricia's old house. "We heard stories about what this neighborhood used to be like," the husband said. "Sounds intense." "It was," I admitted, "but it's a lot better now." "Everyone has been so welcoming," his wife added. "We were nervous about moving into an HOA neighborhood, but this place is great." "Just make sure you read the governing documents," I said with a smile, "and do not be afraid to speak up if something does not seem right." As the evening wound down and I helped clean up, I reflected on how much had changed. A simple false report about my house had uncovered corruption, removed a tyrant from power, and ultimately transformed the entire neighborhood for the better. I had moved to Willowbrook Estates looking for a nice, quiet place to live. I'd found that, but only after fighting for it. The fight had been worth it, though. Every time I pulled into my driveway and saw my black mailbox without worrying about a violation notice, every time I parked my truck outside without fear of harassment, every time I interacted with my neighbors without the shadow of Patricia's authoritarianism hanging over us, I felt grateful. The experience had taught me that home is not just about the physical structure. It is about the community around it, the people you share space with, and the mutual respect and consideration that make a neighborhood more than just a collection of houses. My house had been reported as condemned, but Patricia's reign of terror was what actually fell apart under inspection. Justice had a funny way of working itself out sometimes. 3 years after the initial incident, I still lived in the same house in Willowbrook Estates. The neighborhood had continued to thrive under reasonable leadership. Property values had actually increased, partly because word had gotten out that the HOA was now functional and fair rather than tyrannical and corrupt. I had even joined a committee focused on community improvement projects. We had successfully advocated for better street lighting, organized neighborhood cleanup days, and established a community garden where residents could grow vegetables and flowers. It was a far cry from the days when Patricia ruled with an iron fist, and her primary concern was whether mailboxes were the correct shade of beige. One afternoon, I received an email from a homeowner in a different Phoenix suburb. Word of our neighborhood's transformation had spread through online HOA forums, and people were reaching out asking for advice on dealing with their own problematic board members. I spent an hour crafting a detailed response, sharing what I had learned about documentation, knowing your governing documents, building community support, and when to escalate issues legally. I included copies of the petition template we had used and explained the recall process. Helping others deal with their HOA problems gave me a sense of purpose beyond just my own situation. I had not asked to become some kind of HOA reform advocate, but the experience had given me knowledge that could help others, so I shared it freely. Derek, who had witnessed the whole saga from the beginning, joked that I should write a book about it. I laughed off the suggestion, but part of me thought there might be value in documenting what had happened. Not for profit or fame, but as a cautionary tale about what can go wrong when HOAs lack proper oversight and accountability. The most important lesson from everything that happened was simple. Never let anyone abuse their authority without challenging them. Patricia had counted on people being too tired, too busy, or too intimidated to stand up to her. She had gotten away with her behavior for so long because no one pushed back. When I finally did push back, when I refused to be bullied and gathered evidence and rallied community support, everything changed. Not instantly and not without effort, but it changed. The false report about my house being condemned was the catalyst, but the real story was about a community finding its voice and taking back control from someone who had abused their position. I thought about Marcus Chen, the building inspector, and how his honesty and willingness to do his job properly had been crucial. When he told me about the violations he found in Patricia's house, he had not been required to do that. But he recognized an injustice and did what he could to help balance the scales. I thought about Gerald, who could have stayed silent and gone along with Patricia like he had for so long, but who ultimately found his backbone and helped expose the embezzlement. Courage can come from unexpected places. I thought about all the neighbors who signed the recall petition, who spoke up at meetings, who shared their stories of harassment and overreach. Individual voices that came together to create change. And I thought about Patricia herself, sitting in prison, her house sold, her reputation destroyed, her life completely derailed by her own actions. I did not take pleasure in her downfall, but I did not feel sorry for her either. She had made her choices, and she had faced the consequences. The evening sun cast long shadows across my front yard as I stood by my black mailbox checking the mail. A new family was moving in 3 houses down, and I made a mental note to introduce myself and welcome them to the neighborhood. That was how things worked now. We looked out for each other, we communicated, we treated each other with respect. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret asking if I could help set up for the neighborhood Halloween party next month. I replied that I would be happy to help. The party had become an annual tradition, and kids from all over Willowbrook Estates came to trick or treat along our decorated streets. Patricia would have hated it. That made it even better. As I walked back into my house, I paused to look at the inspector's report that I still kept framed on my office wall. It was a reminder of where everything started, of the moment when Patricia's lies were exposed, of the beginning of the end of her corrupt reign. The report stated clearly and officially what I had known all along. My house was in excellent condition with no violations. But more than that, it represented truth winning out over false accusations, integrity defeating corruption, and community triumphing over tyranny. I had bought this house as a place to live, but it had become so much more than that. It had become the site of a battle I never expected to fight, a catalyst for change I never anticipated leading, and ultimately a symbol of what is possible when people refuse to accept abuse and stand up for what is right. Some people might think it is silly to get so worked up over HOA drama. It is not life or death, after all. It is just neighborhood politics, petty disputes about mailboxes and grass and parking spaces. But for the people living through it, for the families being harassed and fined and reported for made-up violations, it matters enormously. Your home is supposed to be your sanctuary, the place where you feel safe and comfortable and free to live your life. When someone takes that away, when they turn your home into a source of stress and conflict and fear, it is not petty at all. It is a fundamental violation of your right to enjoy your property in peace. Patricia had violated that right for dozens of families over her time as HOA president. She had used her position to bully, harass, and control people. She had stolen money that should have gone to community improvements. She had filed false government reports that wasted public resources and could have seriously damaged property values and lives. Stopping her was not petty. It was necessary. And the fact that her own house had the real violations while she was trying to condemn mine, that was not just ironic. It was poetic justice. I settled into my home office chair and opened my laptop. Another email had come in from someone asking for HOA advice. This one was from a woman in Tucson whose board president was trying to force her to remove a wheelchair ramp she had installed for her disabled son. I began typing a response, drawing on everything I had learned. Document everything. Read your governing documents thoroughly. Check if the rules being enforced are actually in the official covenants or just made up. Build support among your neighbors. Do not be afraid to seek legal advice. Stand firm, and do not let them intimidate you. As I wrote, I felt grateful for the experience I had been through, as difficult as it had been at the time. It had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself, about the importance of community, and about the difference one person can make when they refuse to back down in the face of injustice. My house was not condemned. Patricia's behavior was. And in the end, that made all the difference. The Phoenix sun was setting outside my window, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My black mailbox stood proudly at the end of my driveway. My grass was exactly the length I wanted it to be. My truck was parked wherever I felt like parking it. And in my neighborhood, we were building something better than what we had before. That false report had been meant to destroy me, but instead, it had exposed the truth and set everyone free. I smiled thinking about it. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. I finished my email response and hit send, hoping I could help someone else find the courage to stand up to their own HOA tyrant. Then I closed my laptop and headed downstairs to make dinner, content in the knowledge that my home was truly mine. My neighborhood was in good hands, and justice, though sometimes delayed, had ultimately prevailed. The story of Patricia Mooreland and her downfall had become neighborhood legend, passed on to new residents as both a warning and an inspiration. A warning about what can happen when authority goes unchecked, and an inspiration about what is possible when people stand together against corruption and abuse. I had gone from being a guy who just wanted to live quietly in his house to being an accidental activist who helped transform an entire community. I had not planned it, had not wanted the conflict, but I did not regret how things turned out. My house stood solid and strong, passing every inspection, meeting every legitimate code requirement. It was a good house, and now it was part of a good neighborhood in a way it had not been before. That was worth fighting for. That was worth the stress and the confrontation and the months of uncertainty. In the end, standing up to Patricia Mooreland's false accusations and corrupt behavior had not just protected my home. It had helped create the kind of community where everyone could feel at home. And that, I thought as I looked around my living room at the house I had fought so hard to defend, was the real victory. Not just winning the battle, but making things better for everyone in the process. The inspector had found the real violations in Patricia's house, but the neighborhood had found something even more important: our collective voice and the willingness to use it. That discovery had transformed everything. Years from now, when I eventually sold this house and moved on to whatever came next in my life, I would remember this chapter fondly. Not because the conflict was enjoyable, but because the resolution was meaningful. I had made a difference. We had made a difference. And every time I looked at that black mailbox, I would remember the day a building inspector showed up expecting to condemn my house and instead uncovered the truth that changed everything. Justice served, community restored, home defended. That was the story of how an HOA Karren tried to destroy me and ended up destroying herself instead. And honestly, I could not have written a better ending if I tried.